President and CEO at HCDC, and I just wanted to welcome you this morning to one of our annual programs of Real Estate Update. And obviously we've met a need here because we have a full house. So thank you all for being here, and thanks to our four wonderful speakers on our panel this morning. We're going to give you a lot of good information, a lot of good insights, and encourage you all to also, in and around all of that, continue the talking that you're doing with one another, because that's also really valuable. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to introduce my colleague, Catherine Fitzgerald, who will introduce our
much. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Chuck Ackerman. He is a Senior Vice President with Colliers International. He's been with Colliers since 1998 with a focus on industrial real estate for lease or sale. He specializes in single and multifamily commercial buildings. He's certified both as a commercial investment member and Society of Industrial Office Brokers. Those are the highest level of professional knowledge and commitment to the commercial real estate field. With that, Chuck.
Megan Learn for University of Cincinnati Colors. Class of '88, back when the real estate program was just getting underway. This is just so, you know, when I got into business about 20 years ago, I went right into industrial. And back then it was, it was interesting to see what type of businesses were using industrial real estate. But now more than ever, industrial is much more dynamic and in some ways fancy, and it's just more interesting because it's
the mic. Could you use the mic for the Facebook Live? Could you?
Really?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Give me a second here. Never had to raise a microphone. All right. Everybody all right with this?
Yes.
So anyway, as you guys have probably seen a lot in the real estate world, that the commercial industrial real estate is very more vibrant, dynamic. There's a lot more user types, and there's a lot more different types of looks and spaces. So it's a whole lot of fun, and we're seeing a sort of in a good way, an invasion of uses that are non-traditional coming into industrial. That's part of why it's doing so well. I'll get into that, and then I'll take a further dive into the Hamilton County aspect of it. And that there's a lot of really cool things going on with Hamilton County. When I started 20 years ago, maybe my first showing was down in Spring Grove, and there's some older spaces there or whatever. But now, even in the industrial world, even in Hamilton County, there's a ton of new things going on. There's new initiatives, which we'll get into a little bit. And I was trying to think of something to compare the situation to, and the best I could do is, it's like the Rolling Stones. They've been the industry leaders for a long time, and they've found ways to kind of reinvent themselves. Another one might be the Grateful Dead. They have new hip guys in the band. They've reinvented themselves, and they're still the industry leader. They're running the top of their game, attracting everybody to the stadiums. And I might even throw a Cher in there. Been around for hundreds of years, reinvented herself when needed, and wanted everybody here in the room forever. So that's kind of the deal. Maybe we won't do Cher, but anyway, you get the idea. So one more thing before I go to the slides. Just for the sake of simplicity today, since there's a lot of different folks from different backgrounds, I'll divide industrial into two categories. You got bulk warehousing on one spectrum. That's the distribution. That's the big 700,000 square foot deals that have eBay or Amazon or something that really move the needle in a lot of the data and the vacancy and the absorption. And then we have manufacturing, which is usually buildings not that big, but they're industry specific with thick floors, cranes, heavy electric, that kind of thing. The good thing about the manufacturing side of it is that there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of payroll, and it really attracts a lot of municipalities, as a lot of us know. And there's a lot of people here that have really helped clients that I've represented in getting situated into their spaces with Hamilton County or a lot of other places besides Hamilton County. Steve Sievers is my hero for Anderson Township, which is where I live, and so it's been fun to work with a lot of you guys. Uh-oh. Oh, it's one of those. Okay, wasn't here for the dress rehearsal here. So, getting into a few of the trends, you've probably heard this before with reports ad nauseum with low vacancy rates, record high asking rates. We don't put a whole bunch of emphasis on asking rates a whole lot. It is supposed to show us sign of the times, but we look at the facts on the lease comps and what are they going for. But right now, one of the easy measurable things is vacancy rate. Hang with me here. Okay, well, I'll just keep going, guys. So the vacancy rate's 3.8. I mean, about 6 years ago it was 9, and we thought the market was pretty good. So it's getting out of hand. Us agents are PO'd that we don't have a whole lot more listings than we do. All of us, our competitors, we have maybe a third of the amount of listings we had 10 or 12 or even 5 or 6 years ago. So you just have to roll with it, and those companies are doing well, so there's other ways that you can help your clients, that we can help our clients besides showing and finding them properties or listing properties for them. So manufacturing is expanding in the USA. I'll get into that a little bit shortly. But the economy is good. That helps. All this threat from China is a little bit subsided about overseeing the manufacturing. Some are coming back. You've heard that before. So things are pretty good, and the manufacturing is up in the USA. And we were all kind of wondering if that was going to be the case 6 or 8 years ago. Industry-related hiring is booming. Was looking at some publications, and there's been a spark of warehouse workers. The quantity of warehouse workers right now has been a big rise in that, and as well as couriers and truck drivers. So they're all up in numbers. And sure, a lot of you guys have seen stuff with the e-commerce. That's the biggest thing for sure. The e-commerce. That's the big driver of industrial. As much as the municipalities are, okay with it because it moves the needle a little bit on stats, but it's not a big thing with jobs and payroll as much as how big the spaces are. But it sure is rocking right now everywhere. And the $453 billion number in 2017 is supposed to go up. It's supposed to go up 16% in the next 2 years. And then just the U.S. e-commerce sales rose 16.4% from earlier this year, to first quarter this year compared to the first quarter last year. And then there's this whole thing about this last mile locations, and it hasn't hit our market too hard yet, but just with all this race for speed of delivery for a lot of the e-commerce items, there's a trend of neighborhoods enacting smaller spaces, for these last mile locations to have for warehousing that cover the delivery a lot of times to the homes of the nearby people who have ordered to help efficiency. So that just means another rise in commercial industrial real estate use. So obviously we have to pay attention to it because this bulk warehouse product, that's not manufacturing, just the bulk distribution stuff, is accounted for 87% of all industrial new construction. in our market. So, with the bricks and mortar of things, these are the things that are the kind of what people are looking for, what companies are looking for in their new industrial building. Just a little bit of the trends of where we are right now with the whole idea of having to have more space around the building, in the trailer yards for trailer parking. That's a hot topic. So more land is typically needed when a lot of these institutional developers are building these speculative giant buildings. And a lot of times there are trucks that have refrigeration units or whatever in them that would require power to them. So there's a lot of intricacies with the electric need and with both the trucks and inside the building. We've seen ceiling heights go up, not any surprise. Probably all the buildings that were being built 20 years ago were about 28 foot clear at the highest, and it crept up to 32, and now there's talk of 40. That's not necessary in a lot of applications, even for the big dogs, the big dog tenants. The office ratio has gone up a little bit in the warehouse product in both manufacturing and distribution, especially the trend for extra break rooms. That's really getting into it a little bit there. And more docks and drive-ins, always. So, the industrial product differs from the office and retail in that probably half of the industrial users in industrial buildings own the building. Whereas in office, naturally, the user is a tenant in a building and he pays rent and he's a tenant. They don't have a chance to own the building. So a lot of these buildings, especially the ones that require manufacturing or special features, they are owned by the using company. And this will not make any sense to any of you guys, but in Columbus and especially like in California and most other markets, there are hardly any industrial buildings that are owned by the user. It's a strange market we're in here that probably 50% of the transactions that I do as an advisor are purchases. But you don't get a chance to own your building in California, even if you're a user-specific industrial company. That they'll build it, the landlord or developer will build it for you. You do a 15-year lease. So with that in mind, this is my investment page, investment of industrial real estate. So when those industrial real estate pieces that are leased on 5 or 10-year deals, they go to the market, and as you can imagine, they get attracted money from the coasts, west and east coast, attract. They're looking for investments of good, sound companies, maybe in the Midwest. So these are the capitalization rates of when those buildings trade. And again, they can be manufacturing buildings, or they can be the big dog bulk distribution buildings that are maybe banded together with other buildings and sold for big bucks. So these are the rates. You can see that Cincinnati's at 6.1% cap rate. And I'd like to just point out that that is really for the big bulk distribution that have big time tenants in it. In my world, when I'm doing an industrial investment sale, usually the cap rate's about maybe 8 or 9 because it is a local user tenant, and that is on maybe a 5 or 7 year at the most year rate, term, which we don't get a whole lot of 10-year lease deals around here. We get some, but not many. So we're usually dealing in cap rates about that. But again, it's a user market, and we don't get into an investment a whole lot. So why has the square footage gone up with manufacturing and the square footage of occupiers of manufacturing? And it's a lot of things, and there's no way of ranking them, but the whole thing with tariffs and cost of doing business overseas and transportation with the international costs, that's one thing. The new policies that they're talking about, the government folks here that favor business is seemingly giving confidence to small businesses, which comprise a lot of the Cincinnati market here at industrial. And of course, the good PR that goes with the whole Made in the USA. There seems to be, again, hard to measure, but a lot more clout than pick on your whatever country you want. Made in India or made in China, Mexico. Not to pick on any country really, but there just seems to be a lot more confidence in the things that are made in the United States lately. So back to this whole growth of commercial real estate or industrial real estate in Cincinnati. You see we made the top 10. So again, that is mostly with spec. Spec, just to make sure we all know what that word means. It's the builder is speculating that they will get a tenant. They do not have a tenant. But most of that is the big bulk distribution. Most of it is built on spec. Some of them are built lately. They've been building them, and they do a deal while it's being built. So that's a show the sign of the times. So one thing interesting about the industrial market here in Cincinnati is that we have a great industrial base of users. If you go up to Cleveland, it's heavy industrial, very little bulk. If you go to Columbus or Indy, it's not a great deal of manufacturing. There's some, of course, but it's mostly the whole big bomber distribution. So here, you see at the bottom, I'll start at the bottom, e-commerce, of course, is doing great here. And then you got this whole idea of advanced manufacturing. As you probably know, there are a lot of companies in that high-tech engineering. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of them that need have a lot of payroll. They're very attractive to municipalities to move there. They have a lot of office, they have a lot of employees, and they have a lot of high-paying jobs. Jumping from that for a minute to automotive, there's a lot of automotive component suppliers that are here that I've been able to rep, and a lot of other people have too, that do a lot of manufacturing, and it's great. So along this kind of advanced manufacturing aerospace, one of the cool things Hamilton County is doing, and really the community, is this whole Aero Hub. I don't know if you've heard of the Aero Hub site, but Sean Bonus is really close to that, and it's an initiative to try to get those users maybe in the same kind of area, as well as offer incentives to them to buy land and build there. I mean, Sean, you got anything else to add to that?
No, that's we're trying to be responsive to the markets. This is being led by those people. And over the last 5 years, there were numerous studies done on behalf of port and textile by University of Cincinnati Economics Research Group and Deloitte, saying that Cincinnati there's two things that advanced manufacturing is looking for when we're looking over here. It's workforce and it's the shovel-ready sites. We have a workforce. It's in our DNA. You can look at GE Aviation that's been able to be successful in Greater Cincinnati. That's advanced manufacturing. So even though decided we have an opportunity to start to build some density with property, get that property basically as close to shovel ready as we can, but also put incentives in place. So we've spent the last 2 years acquiring property. We have 50 contiguous acres that we own, but we're in the process of just through word of mouth. We haven't done much marketing around it. We actually are talking to Chuck about our first tenant coming in. We've also already sparked a number of potential users. The idea was not to create this typical industrial park. We're just trying to pull somebody out of Blue Ash or pull somebody out of Westchester. The idea was to do a kind of an innovation campus, kind of create an ecosystem for this. So we're really trying to either pull companies that are not within Ohio. Actually, two of the companies we've been talking to are international companies. And then companies that grew out of Cincinnati. So one of the companies we talked to actually had been at HCD station. So we have a landing spot for those companies when they're really ready to take the next piece that can build ground up and build something that's really conducive to the needs.
Thanks, Sean. So, in our particular industrial market, I don't want to advertise that manufacturing jobs are going crazy. There is a small growth of manufacturing jobs, but the production has really gone up, and it's rapidly expanding, which is expanding spaces and that kind of thing. Our research department says that the one sector within industrial that is booming the most is the food and beverage industry. You could just kind of guess on. We've always had a lot of food companies here, but maybe the beverage part of it with the beer and the breweries and other things has caused that. So kind of getting into just this year for transactions in Hamilton County. There have been some big ones. There have probably been some bigger ones that I have not put on here. But this Creek Road building in Blue Ash is a really cool building. It's 153,000 square foot. It's not a campus feel because you come in and it's all these trees, and it's not just your basic front yard of an industrial building. It's a bunch of acres of trees, and it's a very kind of park-like look. It was occupied by United Air Specialists, and an individual or a group of investors bought it, but to put three different, the company was, I guess the entity was called Graphic Village, but they're putting some graphic related, three different tenants in the building. So that'll be nice. The second one, Para Drive, is really not too landmark of a deal. It was bought by Andrew Green, who's a huge component of Blue Ash in commercial real estate. He's done great things. He's bought some really crappy buildings and fixed them up and put tenants in them, and they're much higher prestige than when he bought them. So he's doing great things. There's a lot of people like that. Staker Drive and the Ions Business Park, which is also called the Texall. The Exeter bought a building, and the Rao brothers are in there. They've done a lot of different types of stuff. I think their big use in there is solar panels or greenhouses. And then we were all wondering what was going to happen with this the Brown Mackey building right on Glendale Milford, because it was an industrial building that was half office, and it's classroom office. Whoa! I couldn't find a user for that if my life depended on it. So it's with the horrible ratio of 57,000 of warehouse and 57,000 square feet of office, which is another nightmare with that ratio. So an investment company, the Imbus's, it's a father-son group. I knew the guy in high school, and everything they've touched so far has turned to gold. So hopefully there'll be a nice user in there. But it was they bought it in an auction. And then there's been some big leases. The post office went to 230,000 square feet in Springdale. The spec building, one of the few ever spec buildings in Blue Ash that was built a year and a half ago or so, just leased, just had inner workings, just did a big deal there, 200,000 square feet. And Sharon Road, there's a building that sits off the road a little bit, where Downlight, who's been here, add another space. So, Hamilton County is a little bit different than than Warren and Butler a bit because they don't have as many multi-tenant facilities. So there's a lot of manufacturing. It's a user market. There are a lot of people, a lot of companies are in there using it. So there's tends to be a little bit fewer activity of transactions, but there's a lot going on, but just not as many as some of the neighboring counties. That's not a bad thing. Probably better for stability. But I looked at my report that I did here 5 years ago, and I had a list of land sites that were available in Hamilton County, and they're all gone. Those land sites. However, one of the real helpers of Hamilton County is the port, because they have established a budget to go out and buy some of these underperforming land sites or sites with crappy buildings on them, and get them nice and turn them back out to the market to get hopefully jobs and payroll and good companies to buy them and locate themselves here. So trying to create a land inventory I have on my notes for job and payroll, and then Melissa, can I ask you about you were talking about the social impact investment model, and I also want to say, I got that right, the Greater Cincinnati Redevelopment Authority, because the slang is the port, but anything else to elaborate on that?
We can still call it support.
Okay, thanks.
A lot of people still do. So on the social impact investment model, to Chuck's point, in the absence of some other historic models, maybe through the public sector, we created what is called a future capital note. It's basically the pool we raised is about $11 to $12 million that is sourced primarily and entirely from the private sector, so private companies or high net wealth individuals who, for the exchange of social impact, which is job creation and the repositioning of industrial assets to attract new investment, their money is extended with a very insignificant ROI for a 5-year period until the property sells. It's a portfolio-based kind of approach. So for all of our, including Gibson Green Card and the Cincinnati Gardens, they sit in a portfolio. And there's some math and science behind it, but essentially, as the properties turn over and sell, it creates an opportunity to do more acquisitions or support demolition, redevelopment costs as they might be needed.
Good stuff. Thanks. And so. One of the initiatives they've done is they bought this Gibson Green Card site, which is an Amberley Village, 56 acres, and they will closely govern that to try to attract maybe an out-of-town national headquarter type of user or something with jobs and payroll. I have some other spec on here. I won't go into them individually, but my point is Hamilton County has really come back on the spec. They don't have these giant spaces down by the airport where these 700,000 square foot buildings are. But they're making a move on the spec construction. Down on River Road is a kind of a landmark one where they're building it, and we'll see if we can find some tenants for it very quickly. And there's already some spec build up in the north part of town, up in Springdale and Evendale Commons and Kenwood Road. So Progress Place is up there as well. There's some big time spaces available that already exist. So this is kind of my favorite slide because this is a little bit of the sign of the times, because I deal a little bit less with the bulk industrial and deal with more of the local companies, and I get into that manufacturing a lot. But this is kind of different from everything. It's really the whole non-traditional users. You guys know about this, but this is just to kind of put this in summary. 10 to 20 years ago, the only non-traditional, like when I started 20 years ago, you didn't sell your building or lease your building if you did not get 4 different requirements. And I talked to Sloan about this. A church has to call on your space, a doggy daycare, a car detailer, and the Cincinnati Roller Girls need to call you with a budget of $300 per month, and they want to roll around your warehouse space, and they need to be there tonight. You in? Yeah. So now, unfortunately, we don't get nothing against roller girls, but we don't get too many of those calls. But it's now being substituted by, you talk about a boring type of use when you say self-storage. There's no jobs, no payroll, and it's not too sexy of a use. However, they're buying older buildings and making them look nice. And yes, there's not any payroll, but they're also getting into the downtown places. They're getting down there, as we might know, and in other markets too. They're really getting in there. And the ones that are downtown, like in a couple other markets, they are really tricked out spaces. There's glass. They're super expensive, but naturally everybody's moving downtown, the older folks, and the self-storage follows. So it's a little bit of a struggle on can they get in and do you want them in or whatever. But they've really tricked out. They've really just fancied out these spaces that look really cool. Breweries, we all know about that. I used to be able to list them, you know, when I'm talking about these new breweries. Now there's one in every municipality for sure. One of my favorites is Fred Moore, just because it was an old industrial building and industrial site in Blue Ridge, and it's awesome. They have some great bands. Gym fitnesses, we used to kind of get, when we would get the calls for CrossFit or something, but we're not laughing now, man. They got budgets and they're doing great and they're going everywhere. And I'm talking to Sloan all the time because she gets calls from her office spaces and I get industrial and we compare notes. So that's a good thing, good stuff. And then, you know, the sports games, you know, some of them go to industrial, some don't, but that's out of hand. That's great for industrial. You know, Sky Zone, Bob Bunton from CBRE is running around with a 40,000 square foot need for a cornhole company. They're looking for warehouse space. I just signed my name in blood on confidentiality, but I'm doing a deal near Norwood, 40,000 square feet for another crazy use. That's they have to get their liquor license first, but it's a game that we could all play, and it's going to be nuts. So it's you know, I mean, I'm looking at some of the handwritten notes I had here, and you know, this is really why it's the darling of commercial real estate. There's this cool factor in a lot of them, like SFA Architecture. They're now Elevar. They bought a terrible looking building that was on the market for 3 or 4 years down in Queensgate on Carr Street. And I think I got a picture of it here. Yeah, this was the building. This is in its construction, but Tom Fernandez, great guy. He bought this, took a chance, and apparently they've totally, I keep saying the word tricked out. Maybe I'll say they've really G'd out the space on 2 of the floors, and then with room for growth into the other 2 floors. And they're having a big open house, and they've already had some events, but they're having a NIOP event. I think it might not be until the winter, but I can't wait to get in there and check that out because those architectural companies, Randy, are very competitive, and the design companies on how their space looks. So there's a lot of image is on the line with these spaces. You know, and then one more non-traditional, the Fraternal Order Police. They're building in an industrial park that John Westheimer was building a building up at Knott Hill over on the west side. This was something I went to. I was in Zurich, Switzerland 2 weeks ago, and there's this unbelievable, like, kind of mall feel. I tried to make the video, I didn't get it, but it was an old, really old industrial building with cranes and stuff, and now there's these shops and restaurants and fitness centers. It is really cool. Take my word for it. Last slide. So this is kind of what are we facing right now, challenges-wise, and what's not really bad, but what are we up against? And so you've all heard this before. The first two lines go together: the labor and will my company be? Will I be paying $5 or less per warehouse worker with Amazon down the street? Those, you know, we get paid to provide solutions and answers, but we don't know. We don't know how that's going to. We hope that. And we've heard that there's been at least 1 or 2 companies that have located themselves here in Cincinnati because with all that Amazon's going to be doing here in northern Kentucky. So time will tell. Same with, and it is obviously a big impact in retail and especially office, is the whole automated vehicle thing. Are we going to be doing that in 10 years or not? Will there be a need for parking garages or parking lots in the buildings? We talked about the expectations and the need for speed of delivery for a lot of these e-commerce companies. one thing that really isn't a bad thing, but it makes my job tougher, is the jurisdictions are getting tougher on normal users, especially the municipalities that own land. Like, I'll just give an example, Laughlin and Mason, they own industrial land. They will not take a typical industrial user, or you gotta dance around doing that. You gotta show them out of jobs. Like a plumbing company or something who needs a warehouse and they have workers and they go out on site and fix stuff. That's tough for those users. Even bulk distribution in Mason, and I'm not saying that that's a hotbed for it, but it's there's a real pushback if you don't have a lot of jobs in payroll. So land protection is another thing. All these lily pad protection clauses. Can't move those trees till the bats are out, and they're not out till October in that section, and stuff like that. It's really tough to buy land in a quick motion. Last thing is the rising construction. This Turner Index measures how much more expensive is it to build compared to last year. It was 4.85% higher to build last year than the year prior, and this is supposed to go up maybe 7%. So that really limits new building on both industrial and manufacturing. So I've talked about music. If you remember nothing else, remember this song by Kenny Chesney. It was my first country show last Thursday. He closed with, and this sums up the whole industrial world. She thinks my tractor's sexy. So that's industrial right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chuck. That was great. With that, I'd like to introduce Sloan Nichols, also of Colliers International. She's a brokerage vice president with 18 years of experience in commercial real estate. She started her career in Charlotte, North Carolina, and spent 15 years in Georgia before returning home to Cincinnati. Her focus has been on office and medical space, but she's also been involved with developing sites for office parks, mixed use, and data centers. Welcome, Sloan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Chuck's a hard person to follow. So we're here to talk about the Cincinnati office market, Greater Cincinnati. Hamilton County obviously comprises a lot of it, but not all of it. So I'm going to do a kind of broader picture of the Greater Cincinnati office market. As was said, I've been back here in Cincinnati for 3 years, so I'm relatively new back to the market, but have been in the commercial real estate industry for over 18 years now. And Cincinnati is just one of the reasons I wanted to come back here, besides schools for kids and opportunities, is that I think of this as like a Goldilocks market. It's not too big, it's not too small, just the right size. At least that's how I feel. So glad to be back here. So starting just with some general stats and overview of the market, this gives you an idea of how big the office market is in Cincinnati. We're over 62 million square feet of office space, and the circle there gives you an idea, if you can read it, of what the different markets are and how big they are in relation to the others. By far, the biggest market's downtown. You take that and the periphery, which is just outside of the main market, and that takes care of over 30% of the market. The next biggest suburbs are going to be Tri-County and Blue Ash. So, Tri-County first, yeah, and then Blue Ash. So Tri-County been a little bit slow these days. It's got a higher vacancy, above 20%. And actually Blue Ash has been booming with activity, but has had some historic vacancies right now. So I always say we've had some clients looking in the Blue Ash area, and I always tell them this is a great time because Blue Ash is a super strong market and just has a confluence of events that ended up with a lot of square footage available. And you can see the other markets, it shrinks pretty rapidly as to the sizes. I would note one of the markets in Midtown and Kenwood actually are really two of the hottest markets. There isn't much space there, and the vacancies are historic lows. So those are some of the hot markets only because of the availability. So this past year, at the beginning of this quarter, we are seeing some absorption, which is great, positive absorption of office space. Not a ton, a lot of The users are switching markets, not so much as new activity in the market, so that leads to a fairly steady vacancy rate. It has gone up slightly, but we've been holding over the last year pretty flat. Seeing a lot of people shop around within the Greater Cincinnati market, looking for deals. The trend in office space, unfortunately for those producing office space, is smaller. So a lot of the clients that we're working with are looking to maximize their square footage, which usually means shrinking. So they're doing the same amount of work or more with less square footage. And that gets me to what people are looking for, what users want. So office space has become a talent attractor and retention vehicle. More than just a cost center. It used to be how much we pay per square foot. But now, even though companies are still looking at that, they're competing for talent. Everybody knows this. That's the big factor of whether someone's going to locate in an area. So they're looking for a desirable office environment, interior, but also lifestyle centers. We hear live, work, play all of the time. People think of the urban environment, but Blue Ash is one that is creating its own live, work, play environment with Summit Park development. And that's happening more and more. Users do not want the old typical suburban environment where you have islands of big office buildings and concrete in between. These users want flexibility. They want the employees want to be able to go out for lunch and walk somewhere. They want to take their laptop and work outside, work away from their desk. So this is kind of hand in glove with the idea of using less space. Office workers are working outside of the office, different locations than just their desk. And so that shrinks the amount of square footage, but it increases the importance of the look of the building, the feel of the building, and the surrounding environments. And that's the goal right now for communities to attract the users and the talent. So, who are those users and how many do we get? I said we're kind of Goldilocks, but this is one area where we could use some more mega users coming into the market. Historically, Cincinnati only has a handful, really a couple large users, I'd say over 75,000 square feet. Right now, there's 3 in the market looking around that should be landing soon that are over that size range. And you can see by the graph, 2015-16 were big years for the office market. There was a lot of pent-up demand coming out of the recession that finally hit, and we had a lot of big deals happening. This past year, we had 2 larger deals. We had a lot, as you can see, the big bar is kind of most of the stuff under that. So we're really more of a smaller office environment. We're not the Atlantas with the several 200, 300,000 square foot office deals happening every week. But we have been, in 2015-16, seen some more, and hopefully we're heading back that way. And just one note, Chuck was talking about the spec market in the industrial world. Cincinnati is not a spec market, as you well know. And having been in Atlanta, it was a joke that, there was see-through buildings all the time because they kept building new buildings, and there was never a low vacancy because it started to get low and they just built another one. Luckily, we don't have that problem in Cincinnati, and I know Landings, too, and Blue Ash was the first Class A spec office building in 10 years, in a decade. And there haven't been any since, but, so we just don't have the appetite for that kind of speculation in the market, which really helps in only producing that space when we really need it. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of the areas where you have some major projects going on. All of the markets, well, Mason in particular does have a fairly high vacancy rate right now, so there is some space there to be filled. But these are the 3 markets where there's proposed major developments. And I'll start with Blue Ash. And since we have the expert here, Neil, would you like to give any update on the Summit Park or anything you need to know about it?
I'm looking forward to them breaking ground.
Great. So if you haven't heard, and you haven't been reading any papers, Summit Park is a large mixed-use development. They're taking the old airport and they're turning it into what I would call a business town center. There's going to be residential, retail, and then office space. They're slated, unless things change, about 400,000 square feet of office that's available or could do in that area. And the big attractor there is, no surprise, jobs. High-paying, well-paying jobs to the area. So this is, as I said, the answer to the live, work, play lifestyle for Blue Ash. The suburban Blue Ash market historically is office buildings and they're not connected very well. This has lent that story of live, work, play for that area. One other thing coming online in Blue Ash is the P&G campus, which just came available. And that is huge because it has about 725,000 square feet of office. As you can see with the size office market we have, that is a very large chunk of office space in one location. So the story has been really the past year more stealing or keeping users from market to market. So hopefully we get some new big users landing in here that shakes that up a little bit. Midtown. This is the next big, as I said, Midtown has a very, very low vacancy rate. So it can handle some of these new projects, especially if there's new users coming in the market. The biggest one is the innovation corridor down at MLK. I'm sure everybody's seen that, the work going on there, the partnership that's going on. It's focused more on medical and medical technology companies. NIOSH is one of the big users that has announced that they're going there. Really remaking that whole corridor, the whole gateway to the Pill Hill area of Cincinnati. There's a lot of demand for people, office users being on 71, having that visibility and access of that corridor. So they're getting some traction there. And then you head up the road a little bit, you have Keystone Park with Nair Properties. They've already built a few buildings, hotel, they have a little bit more to build there. I'm not mentioning Rookwood because that's maxed out, but that whole development, it's very hard to find space in that corridor. So you see, and then we have on the lateral, several locations on the lateral. The one space on the lateral I'm representing is a new 75,000 square foot office building proposed. Now all of these projects are proposed, as I said, we're not a spec market, so no one's going out and building these until we have at least half of the building full. And then you of course have Oakley. Oakley's been booming. It's one of the first kind of recreations of a town center in a suburb, a near-in suburb with the center in Oakley. And now with Anthem there, the office space is taking off, and there's a couple more pads there. And then of course the CASFAB property, we talk about the reuse of industrial and infill, which was a manufacturing site, the CASFAB family, or the CASFAB manufacturing company. And now it was looked at FC as one of their sites, but it's still on the market and most likely will be a larger mixed-use development like we've seen. Chuck mentioned this, I just wanted to give a brief nod to it. It's mainly industrial driven. However, there is quite a bit of office proposed in the Aero Hub, and there are companies that need significant office space that are trying to locate near the GEs. And then further north up 75 toward Dayton, that aerospace corridor that's going to be blending MSAs between Dayton and Cincinnati. We see a lot of growth in the defense spending. We focus on that, so we see that area as a future growth corridor. So going forward, I think with office space, the next 12 months, we don't see any major disruption in the current path. We have a strong market. It's not growing hugely, but it is not shrinking. The decreased unemployment rate and the strength of the job sector, we hope is going to translate into that increased demand soon. Office tends to lag behind everybody else with that, so it's not surprising. So there should be a slight increase in demand. A lot of it is going to be based on Cincinnati and Greater Cincinnati area attracting outside users. That's where the ready folks are important, and the different economic development groups Because we really do need to, and I think we've been doing a better job of this, show the world what Cincinnati is. It's long been a forgotten area. I know, having grown up here but not lived here for a while, it's thought of as flyover country, especially if you're on either coast. And then you have the southeast, it's getting a lot of attention, but I think that Cincinnati and the Midwest really is kind of the next great boom area that people are starting to take notice of. We're getting a lot of articles, so looking forward to the next 12 months in the future. Any questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sloan. We're going to move now into the retail sector. First with Terry Omise. He's a senior associate with Cushman & Wakefield, specializing in retail development for shopping centers and mixed-use development for both the urban and suburban markets. He's been with Cushman & Wakefield since 2012 and done over 76 transactions totaling over $50 million in value. Prior to Cushman & Wakefield, Terry was with Phillips Edison for 5 years as a retail leasing specialist. At Phillips Edison, Terry completed over 60 transactions. Welcome, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You can, sure. All right, thank you for having me today. Fire away any questions as I go, too. I want to keep this informal. I'm going to try and give an update on Hamilton County and the market as a whole, and then you really can't get that update without kind of diving into retail trends and just what we've seen, which is the way that people shop and what retailers are looking for, and the way that developers are creating space is changing rapidly, and the way in which we shop changes a lot faster than the brick and mortar aspect of it can keep up sometimes. So feel free to fire away questions. Let's dive right in. Just a quick update on asking rent versus overall vacancy rate. Follow that. The economy's good in all sectors. We know this. So that yellow line trending downward over the last couple of years is the overall vacancy rate, which in Cincinnati right now is hovering right around 8.4% for retail. And we're seeing the rental rates creep up. The average on the retail side is about $11.60 a foot. So 8.4 vacancy, and then going up to $11.60 a foot. The next two slides, I'm going to cover a couple of our competitive markets to give you an idea of where we stand. If you look at Cincinnati at the top there, these are the retail vacancy rates. Like I said, we're at 8.4. I'm going to slide in the front so I can see this. Let me know if you need me. If you can't hear me, okay. U.S. as a whole, 6.6. So we lag behind that a little bit. I think it's more impressive to look at, or more important to look at our competitive markets. So Cleveland, 7, Columbus, 5, Detroit, 9.1. We're a little bit ahead of them. Indy and Louisville. It's always a little misleading to look at these numbers and to figure out what that means. You've got issues like topography and the ease of development that a market like Louisville is going to be similar to like our west side of Cincinnati, where there's topography issues, there's a little less development, there's only a handful of pockets. You look at a market like Nashville, it's just absolutely on fire. Or Pittsburgh, where you have severe topography, it's just hard to build anything. So then the cost of developing that site just gets higher and higher. When you're a retailer, the big thing we look at all the time, especially with any regional or national players, is we're not competing against even so much markets within the city and where they're choosing. It's Cincinnati versus the entire Midwest versus the entire nation, and where they're looking to roll out stores one at a time. So that's kind of the thing you have to keep in mind. And then what's the ease of access, of availability, and what space they can find. I'm going to get into trends of what retailers are looking at in terms of space, because that's the hardest thing that some of my colleagues and I find is that the spaces that exist just don't match what the retailers are asking for now, and there's not enough development coming. There's a little bit of a barbell effect. Retail rates, $11.60 a foot. U.S. as a whole is at 17. Keep in mind this is encompassing all the gateway cities, so the New Yorks of the world, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Atlanta. Cleveland is 10.68. You see Columbus as a whole, Indianapolis, and then Nashville up there trending way up. Columbus and Indianapolis a little bit ahead of us. Nashville is just one of the hottest markets possible to get into. It's an interesting benchmark, I always feel like, from a retail perspective, because it's so similar to Cincinnati. Now granted, they have the market cornered on bachelorette parties. There's not a single bride who's gotten married in the Southeast or Midwest in the last 5 years who hasn't gotten a pedal wagon in Nashville, I'm pretty sure. But they also benefit from just being one of the largest cities in the Southeast. So if you're just choosing anywhere in the Southeast, it's pretty much Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville. Whereas the great thing about the Midwest, but tough for us in Cincinnati, is inside of 2 hours we have 6 very comparable cities that you can choose from. So it's a little more diversified that way, which is why I think you see something like a Nashville getting so much of that coming in. You can't discount the industry and the tech that they have down there, the education as well. It's just a little bit more concentrated, just within their state alone, of what they're going to draw. That's why you see the rental rates reflecting that at $1,583 a foot. Kind of getting into overall trends, we're seeing sales go way up on what shoppers are spending overall, but we're also seeing a lot of closures. So the buzzword, I didn't put it in any slide, but you're going to read about it in every headline, and especially from Wall Street, is the retail apocalypse. We're dying. I know. What's your take on that? Is it overblown? Thank you. Exactly. Exactly. It's a shift, if anyone didn't hear Kathleen. It's exactly right. But the headlines are always that it's retail apocalypse.
We need to retire now, Terry. Just go.
I know.
Live on a farm.
No one's shopping. It's done. Time to go home, right? I'm not a Wall Street expert. The reason well, one, it's easy to write about. When you see someone like Toys R Us go under, and it's near and dear to our hearts, and we grew up shopping there, and we miss Jeffrey and the ads and everything else, and they seemed like a pretty good store, that really didn't have to do as much with shopping trends. It was more that they're an over-leveraged company. However, and I'm going to get into online sales as well, I do feel like if you're a middle tier retailer, if you're not at the discount end, if you're not at the high end, and if I can stand in the aisle and on my phone double check the price and just have it shipped to my home faster than I can take the object up to the front counter, you're probably in trouble. So you need to get into the service aspect and create that customer experience, which I'll get into a little bit. But overall, we're seeing closures go up. What I'm going to get into are some of the reasons why. These are structural issues, more so than they are reflective of the retailers themselves. So here are a couple of the factors that get into it. It's an over-retailed marketplace. And there's some markets within Cincinnati where you can see this. I think Tri-County is a big example of this, where they did everything right in the 90s, and those reflected the trends of a lot of the box users and the power centers. When you look at everything along the Kemper corridor, as opposed to the mall, there's a lot of box vacancy, and that was the right way to develop in the 90s. It was what the trends were, but now things have shifted. Most of the retailers are looking for smaller footprints, and so it's just developed in a way that, kind of going back to what Chuck had said, where you're finding self-storage uses and things like that to take those down. Those aren't as sexy of uses, but it's kind of what's needed to fill some of these to where retailers never going to grow to that same size again. So the reason that industrial is going up, so much of it's the online sales and where the retailers are using their 16, 20, more than that? All right, we'll get there in a second. You'll be surprised by the answer. Race to the bottom of discounting. I think some of the retailers that we're really seeing boom right now are the TJ Maxx's of the world, the Ross Dress for Less that's entering the market, where you're seeing, I think a big reason for that is because you have to go in person to find that bargain. You can compare a price online at Amazon, that sort of thing, but when you're really looking for the surplus merchandise that a Ross or a TJ Maxx has, you have to go in person to find that item at the moment. And you're kind of just looking for a bargain as you're walking through that store. You don't have in mind, I want X, Y, and Z. You're kind of just going in to see what they got in at that time. So you're seeing the discount retailers boom, and as I had mentioned before, the mid-tier struggling a little bit if you can compare it online. It's not so much that the percentage of sales online are out there that we're spending differently in that way, it's that you can check your price right there. Everyone has to be honest right off the bat, because same way you're buying a home or anything else, the data's right there. You can access it immediately on your phone. And then a big thing, you can't do any retail presentation nowadays without mentioning millennials. And that will, sorry for all the millennials in here, the 22 to 36-year-olds that are in here, you're going to have that for the rest of your lives. Just like the baby boomers, you're going to be blamed for everything, and then you're also going to be followed as a trendsetter, because the empty nesters and the baby boomers are following what you learned how to do first. But shifting consumer spending patterns, you have to pay attention to that. Millennials spending less than previous generations. That means less on stuff to fill a home. You're not buying as large of a home. You're waiting a couple of years longer to go buy that home. You're not putting as many things into it. You're spending your money instead on travel and on gym memberships. So, well, seriously, like usually, I think I'm somewhere between X and millennial. We didn't get a gym membership till our later 20s when our metabolism didn't work as well, and you had to start doing something about it. Now, as a millennial, and really everyone, but millennials set the trend, you have 2 gym memberships. You have your normal gym, your LA Fitness, your Planet Fitness, and you're spending $30 to $50 a month on that, and you have your boutique fitness, which is your bar, your yoga, your hot yoga, your personal trainer, your CrossFit, your spin class, and you're spending $150 a month on that, because that's experiential. You care about your fitness, we're more aware about it. It's also a social aspect. You're going to meet your friends, they're keeping you honest and driving you to class. And we're seeing the developers adapt to that, but that's something you have to pay attention to, how we're spending that money. But that also means you're spending that money on your class every month, and not on a new vase, or a chair, or a rug. You don't care about it as much because you're not in your home as often because you're at spinning class. All right. E-commerce, 9.3% is the answer. To say it's lower than what everyone says is true, but to say that that's not a threat is to ignore the reality of it. So it is a real number, and it's continuing to grow. We're looking at probably around 12% by 2020 is where that's trending. We're over 9.3% right now for average online sales. I think the areas that we're going to see this continue to grow that's going to affect real estate, e-groceries, e-pharma, e-furniture. Who in here has bought something from Wayfair or one of their many brands, or Overstock? Overstock or Wayfair. It's about a third of the room right now. If you're not familiar with those, you will. All Modern, Joss & Stone, those are all different variations of Wayfair. That's buying furniture online. You don't have to go try it out. I'm doing that right now. I think a lot of people probably want to sit on the couch to see if it's comfortable, but you can kind of tell what the end table looks like. You don't need to go to the store to buy it. The bad news for us in retail is furniture guys take down a lot of square footage. So that then kind of goes back to a lot of the big box guys that we see growing in the market right now are discount oriented. So then it's the specificity of the item that you want. They're getting it from Overstock or sending it to their retail facility. You need to actually go to the store to see what they have there at the time. You can't just check it online, and you're finding that bargain because of it. All right, here's the millennial slide. You know I have one. Experience over stuff. Authenticity, uniqueness, choice, variety, intimacy, and shopping experience. Cool is valued. 59% of millennials look for physical store presence when buying online. That's something to keep in mind. I'm going to get to Warby Parker, jumping ahead, who's going to open in about a month downtown. It's an online eyeglass provider. But when they open a brick and mortar store in a market, they see their online sales jump by 35%. So it goes hand in hand. It's just a difference of use of what the retail store is now. It's not necessarily the place where you go to buy everything. It's more of a showroom. It's showing off the product. You want to go try it on, ask your friends, see what you think. Does your husband like how this looks? Does your wife like how that looks on you? Then go home and buy it later. What that means for us is it's smaller square footage, but you need to be in the right location. You can't be a block away. You can't even be half a block away. You have to be exactly where your customer's walking by. This is not the retail apocalypse, right, Kathleen?
We're gonna stop it, just the two of us.
Just alone. We got it.
And the on-site.
And the on-site guys, we got this. It's important to keep this in mind with these numbers. So 10,000 closings annually, but 14,000 opening. The biggest categories over here, those are small relative to the 14,000, but 1,900 mass merchandise, 1,700 convenience stores, and then grocery. One of the best things about the Cincinnati market, Hamilton County as a whole, is that we have Kroger headquartered here. One of the worst things for retail is that we have Kroger headquartered here, though, because it keeps all the competitors out. When we want, it's great to be next to them, but they've got 2/3 market share wherever they're going. So it's great to have them here. We ride and die with them too. And groups like Lidl were really threatening to enter the market and talking a big game about it as well. They might still come, but they've really kind of tripped out of the gate with their store openings in the Carolinas and Virginia. Their sales were a lot lower than what they had expected. Lidl, if you're not familiar, is kind of most similar to Aldi. It's a discount grocer, European-based. They, at least those of us in retail, knew that they were tying up land and looking to enter, and really going to make a strong presence. I was curious to see how that was going to go. I'm kind of excited about it. I'm not even sure if we're going to see them enter the market at this point now. It's yet to be determined. If you guys have any insight on it, jump in. But I think last I've heard is they're on hold. Yeah.
And Fresh and Easy went down in flames before.
Yeah, I know. And then there's also the consolidation within the market too. Kroger picks up Lucky's, Mariano's Fresh Market, things like that. So let me keep going here. This will give you a good idea who's closing, who's growing just across the board. Hamilton County focused, Macy's right there. We're seeing a lot of their store closures. Is anyone really surprised by it though? Not really. Like the downtown store closing, no one was terribly surprised by that. If you walked in that store, it was lagging the whole time. I think Macy's was doing us a favor keeping that open for a lot longer than it probably needed to be. That's one of the best pieces of real estate in the city. It'll be fine. It's at Fountain Square. The owners will figure it out. 4.5 owners who have that property at Fountain Place will figure that out. They're going to be more than fine right there. I think none of us are surprised by the Macy's closings. What is good to see is how they're reinventing the space within their store, backstage, and targeting the discount side of things within their own store. What's just hard as a whole for department stores and malls is going to be that it's a whole lot of space. You're using almost more of an industrial use. It's your stock room and your warehousing is your store, and that's not cost efficient when you're paying the retail rate to be front and center, and you can do a much smaller footprint to be that showplace. For you to pay attention to, Ross is about to enter our market here now. I think they usually wait for a media buy before they come in. If you've never shopped in one, it's TJ Maxx. Same thing, it'll be a competitor, similar type of product, same price point, same size, exact same merchandise. Say again? Not as nice. Ladies and gentlemen, TJ Maxx is broken. I agree with you though. I think Aldi will make a couple of deals in the market, maybe a little bit shifting here and there. They're going to be at the discount end of grocery, but it's always good to have that competition as well. These are, just see some of the categories over here: dollar stores, discount, off-price, beauty, fitness, fast food, coffee, etc. Everyone know what Clicks to Bricks is? This is where you're an online presence first, and then you have brick and mortar after the fact. I'm going to get into two of the ones we just got recently. So Bonobos just opened last week. It's online men's clothing. Warby Parker glasses I have on now, they'll be coming next month. So you start with an online presence, and then you go to brick and mortar. All right, neighborhood community center. The strip centers, for the most part, are doing okay. If you got a shopping center like this, which is your typical 60 to 150,000 square foot shopping center. If you're back here, this is going to struggle. If you're not up on the main road, this is where most of our clients do not want to go. If you can get around any REAs and you can build a building up front here, that's where everyone's going to want to go. So it goes back to a point I made earlier about the average rental rate being $11.60 a foot. It's not a real story, it's an average, but in retail, we kind of don't care about the average as much because it's less of a commodity, it's much more commodity, much more specific where you go. So your big box rates are encompassed in that, which are going to be mid to upper single digits, depending on. Most of your inline space at a grocery anchored retail center right now throughout our market are going to be in the mid-teens, depending on where you go. Some of them are going to creep up into the low 20s. However, if you can create an out parcel building up front here, and it's designed for the Chipotles of the world, 2,500 feet, with a patio, possibly with a drive-through, with all that visibility on the road, we have a lineup of tenants that are all willing to pay $35 to $43 a foot. And so that skews that rental rate from where they're going. It's small square footage, but there's just not enough of that product out there for us to find. Overall, these centers are going to be okay because as much as there's threats to grocery and they have to adapt, you still like to go to your grocery store and touch and feel. And then it's just up to the developers and the listing agents to merchandise this properly who is your shopper, pay attention to who's coming, put as many internet-proof uses in there as possible, and just pay attention to who's in your parking lot and then cater to them the most. If it's mom dropping off kids, one at preschool, and she's got time to run to Kroger, think of Harbor Square right now. It's not Hampton County. I'm trying to think of another. I don't know. Anyway, Anderson Kroger. And you go to the Anderson Kroger at Beach Mountain, Wolfangle. Who else is around there? You're running in after you drop a kid off, and you got two that are coming back at 3, but another you got to pick up at noon. You've got time to go squeeze in a fitness class. You've got your dry cleaner, that sort of thing. You just merchandise it that way, and you have to be smart about doing so. There's still business to be done. I think one of the biggest trends I'm seeing with these over the last 5 years is the increase of medical going into these spaces, where the orthodontist, the eye doctors, the dentist, you name it, see the value of their storefront. They already have such a large expenditure to put into the space anyway with their plumbing and their specific offices and their needs, and they usually don't move anyway. It's worth it to spend a little bit more to go into a retail space because your storefront is now your advertisement. Your customers find you that way. You get new patients because you're front and center or someone's shopping a couple of times a week. Fire away any questions too. I'm flying through a bunch of info all at once. So these are two of the Clicks to Bricks retailers I just talked about. My partner Tori brought these downtown to over the Rhine. Bonobos just opened on Thursday. Anyone shopped at Bonobos? Josh, you probably do, don't you? Fair enough. If you're not familiar, they're like a J. Crew Plus. They started online. They got their start as khakis that fit better, essentially. Make khakis look a little bit better on you. A trimmer fit, more urban fit. Price point wise, jeans are going to be $110 to $140, sweaters $125 to $150, button up shirts $70 to $110, somewhere in that range. The Guide Shop, that's a 1,600-foot store that just opened across from the Kroger on Vine Street at 14th and Vine. They're not going to carry hardly any inventory. You're going in to find your size and your color, and then they're going to ship it to you 2 days later. The big thing to pay attention to here is me or another guy who's going out shopping on a Sunday once a quarter because we need clothes and just wants to knock it out all at once. We're not thinking about it the way that Bonobos wants to be there. They're not. That's why they're not in Kentwood right now. That's why they're not going to where you're shopping and knocking it out all at once. This is a guide shop. They want to grab you when you're out to dinner with your wife or you're on a date and you want to go in there and see what looks good while you're waiting for your table at Zula to open up 30 minutes later. And you're going to go in here and check out the store and see what fits, but you don't want to carry a bag with you when you go home. So you're going to find what you like, they're going to size it up right, and they're going to ship it to you 24, 48 hours later. But it's a difference in where they're locating based on how we're shopping. It's not Sunday and knock out all the clothing on needs for 2 hours before a game starts. It's a different time and a different way of shopping. Warby Parker, I think, will be a giant hit downtown. And the thing for us, and with retail, we're always the icing on the cake, but for economic development, we don't move the needle. We don't create jobs in retail that much. But we do add a cachet to the city when you can say what retailers you have here. And when offices are looking to relocate a headquarters, and they care so much about the employees they can, killing my mic here, sorry. When they care about the employees that they need to retain and attract, it does matter who's in a market. It does matter when someone's coming in with their spouse or significant other and they're walking the streets and deciding if they're going to take that job with that company and come work for P&G or come work for Kroger downtown. They're looking around the city and it's like, well, we're giving all this up that we have in Atlanta. Why do we want to come here? They don't even have X. They don't even have Y. And that's what adds to that experience. Getting guys like Warby Parker into the market does a lot for us and will help us attract more to this town. That was the deal with 3CDC. I know Bonobos specifically said that we were not top of their list, Cincinnati being we were not top of their list for new stores, but because of the deal that 3CDC was able to cut, the affordability and the ease of getting into the market and the speed with which they did it, it jumped way up to the top and we're able to get that deal done ahead of a lot of other markets they've targeted ahead of us. So the lesson from that is just flexibility on the ownership side. Get the deal done quickly when you have a bird in hand, knock that out fast. I want to get into a couple of specific developments around town. Again, fire away questions because I'm throwing out a lot. So in retail, it's more about, I think when we get a client and they say they want to roll out in the market, we typically hear the same 4 to 8 markets where they all want to develop. because most of our new clients are food, because of how we're spending our dollars and our time. We're eating out 3 and 4 times a week now, and the fast casuals are growing that much more. They look at the heat maps on where people spend their money, where the incomes are, that sort of thing. You constantly hear it's pretty much Hyde Park, Kenwood, Westchester, Mason. We try and sell the value of what the West Side can offer. It's just something that confounds a real estate director when they're looking at a different market a couple of times a week, and it's not right off of a highway exit. I don't understand Harrison Avenue. I don't understand that Glenway attracts all of that in there, even though we know there's 250,000 people within 5 miles, and it all comes into one basin and they spend their money there. It just doesn't jump off the page if you've got an hour to make a decision. One project that really captivated a lot of people and drew a lot of attention in town is the Shops at Anderson Town Center. So this was a Kroger development. Steve, right, was here. I know it had a lot to do with this. I know Kroger worked a lot with Anderson Township to bring this about. This is kind of an example of where retail trends are going. If you're deep in line, buried next to a large vacant box in a 200,000 square foot strip, you can't give the space away. Whereas this is an 18,000 square foot center, and I think I'm up to 48 letters of intent for where I can fit 6 tenants in here. So the tenant lineup that we have, McAllister's Deli just opened up about 4 weeks ago and has been doing absolute gangbusters. Ambiance Nail Salon with a bar, so you can get a mimosa, both Bloody Mary, while you're getting manis and petties. They opened up, and from what I hear, has been doing very well. Orange Theory Fitness should open this week, and Chipotle should open within 3 or 4 weeks, I believe. They're very close. Kroger, as a developer, after talking with a lot of different restaurants, decided to put their own restaurant in Building 2. So this is at Beachmont and Wolfenkel. The store is right behind here. This is looking from the other direction. This is Building 2, McAllister's and Ambiance over here. Kitchen 1883 will take down Building 2. So that's Kroger's own restaurant concept. I don't know if anyone's tried it yet. Their first store is in Union, Kentucky, next to their marketplace. So that'll be brunch, lunch, dinner, full bar, very family friendly. They're still narrowing in on their exact square footage. And I've just got roughly 1,500 feet left in the back there. This is the reason I put this one on here, though, is because of what I talked about, the dichotomy between the rental rates. Steve, I gave you a shout out a minute ago, sorry. This one looks familiar to you a little bit, right? You've probably been looking at this for 5 years now, I think, or maybe 4.5. KZF helped a lot with the design on this one, or did the design on this one, I should mention. We took this to market at $40 a foot, which I think everyone was yelling at us at the time for being overpriced, but then the amount of interest that came in on that was just, it reflected that I think we had it priced about right. But when we launched that maybe 3 years ago, that was insane to ask for $40 a foot in a suburban market. And now you're seeing it left and right, and it's reflective of the lack of availability of development for retail if you check all those boxes. The good thing is the retailers are smarter about what they want. The bad news is that space doesn't exist. And if it does, there's a long line of it. If you're a local or regional player, you probably don't have the credit to jump ahead of the Chipotles of the world if they decide they want that space. It's good news as a developer, though, but just be mindful of what they're telling you and what works. Make sure it's visible, has access, has more than enough parking. Another development, Oakley Station. This is just on gangbusters, and this is true mixed use that you hit on earlier, office. The apartments right over here at the boulevard. These have all just been completely full. And then the former industrial space, Mad Trees, right across the street, one of our top 2 breweries. And this has really become the true live-work-play dynamic over here. Even though access is funky getting into here, it's got great access from the highway on the opposite side, where you access Target in the center of Cincinnati. Getting in from Madison can be a chore, but this is really just a dynamite location where you've got Crossroads Church right next door that brings in like 10,000 visitors a week, and then the brewing and everything else. And then some of the ancillary strip centers that are going up front have generated a tremendous amount of demand. And then in this market, it's a good example where a 145,000 foot Kroger can open a marketplace 1 mile from one of their top stores. They still have a 105,000 foot store at Hyde Park Plaza, which is doing just fine. There's a slight dip in sales, but they still do just fine. The more you can create this experiential environment and get all the pieces of real estate coming together, the better. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Summit Woods and Blue Ash, but I think it's a similar dynamic where it's the attentive to what the missing holes are in the market and who can fill it. This is the Gallery of Kenwood. This is a project I'm working on right across from Kenwood Town Center, in between the movie theater and Jewish Hospital. You probably saw it in the headlines a couple of weeks ago. It was shot down 4-1. They go back and redraw it. This should come back. I think the developers, Capital Investment Group, have listened to what the township has told them and are making a couple of tweaks to come back. On the retail front, this is only at most 20,000 feet of retail space. It's probably more like 15,000. It's probably 3 restaurants and maybe a medical user that wants a retail presence. But it's a 950-car garage right back here. For perspective, Macy's, Red Robin, that side of the mall on Kenwood Road is just right across the street over here. That's a Jewish hospital in the back that continues to expand. This will be roughly about 140 key hotel, and then between 260 and 290 apartments in the back, and then about 100,000 square foot office building over here. The retail will be right here and right here. This is about 8,000 to 9,000 feet. This is about 8,000 feet for probably 2 restaurants. We just want to be mindful of how we merchandise that to not clog parking. Parking is always the big thing. As successful as Brookwood Exchange is, it's also not fun to try and go to Jason's Deli at lunchtime if you have a meeting, because everyone and their brother wants to be there right now and is in that parking lot at the same time. So we just want to be mindful of that. I think I've got one more for you. Everyone know what this is? This is our Kroger downtown. We finally got it. But that's a 50,000-foot Kroger going right next to their headquarters at Walnut and Court Street. So the perspective from that drawing, you're on Court Street. The left side is Walnut, the right side is Court. You can see the courthouse in the back and the Hamilton County building right there. And it's in between Court and Central Parkway. If you've been down, everyone in the entire city was in downtown this weekend. I think there were more events going on than I can recall, between the Reds, FC, Music Festival, Reds game, etc. If you got your recent update looking at this, they're about 6 stories out of the ground now. I think opening date is end of 19 for the store. Correct me if that's wrong. It'll be a 50,000-foot Kroger on 2 levels. It's a great thing when they can acquire Mariano's Fresh Market in Chicago and teach them how to merchandise in an urban setting. It sounds like a given, but it's actually harder than you think to merchandise a store and what you put in there. The big thing being you're not taking the 24-pack of Coca-Cola home with you because it's heavy. And you're probably going to order that online or do your click list and pick it up later. You're not going to get the giant family size Tide because it's heavy to carry. You're going to get the smaller items. And it's going to be much more perishable. The difference is you're going to go to this store 3 and 4 times a week and just grab something you're probably going to consume within 24 hours as opposed to doing your shopping for the month. This is a great, great thing for our city, and especially for the offices that are looking to relocate here. I'm excited about it. It'll be interesting to see how it affects the Newport Kroger. Newport's drawing 35% from Ohio, which is unheard of to cross a state line and a river. 2 giant barriers to entry to do your daily needs shopping. I'm excited about this coming online. I've thrown a ton of info kind of all over the place between trend and market update. I'm going to stop there to see what other questions. Are we doing questions after? Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Terry, thank you so much. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce our friend Kathleen Norris. She is the principal and managing director of her own firm, Urban Fast Forward. She specializes in urban real estate and revitalization and played an important role in leasing the Gateway Corridor and Over the Rhine, which most of you probably already know. She recruited over 20 retailers and restaurants in that corridor, and has since become one of the most sought-after consultants and practitioners on the real estate issues pertinent to urban revitalization. Prior to becoming a realtor and consultant, Kathleen was an arts industry executive for more than 30 years, serving as CEO for performing arts companies in Cincinnati, New York, and Australia. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, and I'll try to master the technology without too many screw-ups. One of the things that's most important in the work that I do is that Urban Fast Forward is a firm that is not purely a real estate firm. And John Young, who leads our consulting division, he is sitting here. We do a lot of planning before we do any leasing. And it is kind of axiomatic to the work we do that if a community does not have a millennial recruitment and retention strategy, it's a stagecoach town. And I think that's very important to touch on, and everybody here has, and I have been, these are the notes that I have taken from the 3 previous speakers who have been fabulous, but nobody has touched upon the other group that combined with millennials makes up about 70% of the US population at the moment, which is baby boomers. And we can't ignore them, A, because they are the second largest population segment still, and B, because they got money, and they got free time. And their preferences are actually converging for different reasons with those of the millennials. The millennials like public transit, increasingly the baby boomers will need it. The millennials like walkable urban places, increasingly those will be places where the baby boomers will feel most comfortable because they will have easy access to the greatest number of resources. So when we talk about what we're doing in our cities and towns and retail centers, we have to also take into account the baby boomer preferences. And this is where we go urban, suburban, schmurban, because we also talk in Urban Fast Forward about the fact that urban has a variety of meanings. It doesn't always mean urban, it doesn't always mean over the Rhine. We are very proud to be the leasing company for the second phase of Summit Park in Blue Ash. And we have done work in communities such as Loveland, and it was in Loveland where somebody said to me, "You're the urban girl, what are you doing up there?" My answer is, Loveland has a perfect urban downtown. It's a perfect city in the country. So we're gonna see these urban preferences moving out into, Terry just talked about Anderson, these urban preferences moving out into those communities as millennials move into family formation, and as we all recognize that there's no universal preference across any sector. I said to a millennial once, I said, well, you know, a lot of millennials think over the Rhine's a little too gritty for them. They looked at me and said, it's too gritty for me. That's why I live in Bellevue. So all those preferences are things we have to take into account. And here's my first tech test. Yay. This is why I'm here. Because in 2006, I was hired as a consultant. I was not then in real estate. I should say real estate is my family's traditional business. Both my mother and my father were brokers. My mother's family went back into real estate 3 generations from her, and it was the business I always said that I was never going into. Which means that somewhere there's an old Irishman, my father, laughing his head off because he always said I'd be good at it. My first career was in the arts, and I was hired to work with 3CDC to create a retail district in Over the Rhine centered on the arts. And I very quickly concluded, partly thanks to a very talented developer named Rick Kimbler, that the arts was not a sufficiently strong recruitment principle in a city like this. Because what I always say is, when your girlfriend or wife says to you, honey, let's go downtown and spend the day in that cute new arts district, the man says, baby, would you shoot me now instead? But if she can say, there's a bonobos down there, and you can get some cool clothes, and we can have a great lunch at the Senate, and then there's a crowd, and then we can go up to Rhine Guys and sit in the roof garden and have some beers, okay, she'll make that up to you. She'll make that good for you. So we started in 2006, and this is what Over the Rhine looked at. And so all of you who maybe weren't here then and think that Over the Rhine's incredibly cool and you really enjoy going down there, nobody was saying that in 2006. And 3CDC was the secret sauce. And that's what it looks like now. But as somebody who got into real estate doing this, I didn't have all the training in the traditional practices of real estate. But what I did have, and Catherine touched on it, was a long career in the arts. So the one thing that I am deeply trained in is the experience economy, and that's where we are. And I concluded, having everybody tell me that retail follows rooftops, I concluded that if you have the right place and the right strategy, you can make rooftops follow retail. And I proved it in Over the Run, because we started with 100 vacant condos for sale and about 15,000 square feet of retail. And somebody told me later, one of my developers told me later, and in fact Steve Leeper told me later, that they never thought that I could lease the retail. The only reason I could lease the retail is because I'm unbelievably bloody-minded. And I had promised somebody that I would lease the retail, and so I felt that that was something that had to be done. But we were able to persuade a group of independent retailers to see what we saw. And looking back on it, how we ever thought we could sell condos above what we thought would be boarded up retail is mysterious to me. So we found 5 or 6 retailers who would join in our adventure, and we opened with 3. Only one of whom is still there. And then we added Micah, which is on that hard corner there, and they are still there. But none of them had credit. None of them had particularly distinguished track records. What they had was a ton of grit and a willingness to play. And what we had was a landlord in 3CDC who could say, they will contribute to a sense of place. Bring it on. And that, to me, is the most important thing in the work we do at Urban Fast Forward. We are all about building place. And we build it through all kinds of, we now work across the real estate spectrum. We do small office. We're doing a deal for a major international firm right now in the office sector. We do warehouse. We do all the things. We don't do it in the way that my colleagues do it. We don't do it at that scale. But people come to us because they want something special. I found it very interesting because everybody has talked about the changes. Chuck talked about what people in the industrial sector are looking for now. They're looking for a different type of space, and they're looking for it in a different type of place. If you don't have all those amenities proximate to industrial, you can certainly attract industrial users, but there will be a sector that will say, no, I really need more. On the Amazon 2 search, we're probably lucky we didn't get Amazon 2 because we would have been a little like the dog that caught the car. But they were looking for amenities. They were looking for good places for their workers to live. They were looking for lunch places. They were looking for all the amenities that the millennial generation wants. And so this was where we started to prove our theory that place matters. The elements of success in this land, and Blue Ash is an interesting example, an old airport. And so we're building a mixed-use development up there that will have a hotel. It will have at least 200,000 square feet of office. It can have a lot more. There's a headquarters location up there set aside. It will have about 300 units of market rate housing, and it will have about 300 units of phased senior housing. And it will have 40,000 square feet of retail across from the 20,000 square feet of retail that we already put in the park. And I think it's interesting. I kind of agree with Terry about Oakley Station, but, and if Rob Spyjunas, who is the client, were in the room, I would still say this, I think it's a hellscape. I absolutely think it's a hellscape. And it amazes me that anybody wants to live there. That's me. My preferences are not universal. But we're going to do a different version of that, smaller scale, completely different in style, but essentially the same thing in Blue Ash. And by doing that, we're going to strengthen Blue Ash overall. We're going to strengthen their ability to attract office users, to attract warehouse users, to attract workers. And Blue Ash has been a very forward-thinking community. They started a decade ago retrofitting sidewalks. They now have their own bike program. They have very visionary leadership that has understood that to remain a regional office capital, they have got to move into acquiring millennials. They have got to, because that's the workforce of the future. We can talk about baby boomers, but they are moving out of the workforce. Millennials are moving in, and that's why we talk about millennials all the time. Because they're the people we have to attract to stay alive. So what do you do with land that's interesting? And when Terry showed his slide of Anderson, the development looked more like that than it looks like the old strip centers and regional centers that we've been building. They brought the buildings out to the street wall. They didn't put parking fields in front. It always mystified me that we accepted retailers saying that they had to have a parking field out front so their customers would know where to park. They only need that the first time. After that, they figure out that if they turn right and turn right again, there's plenty of parking behind the building. So let's assume that customers are a little smarter than we give them credit for. And it's what makes a lively community. A parking field out front is really uninteresting, and by the time you see the building in the distance, and remember, we've got people driving past, and we've got microseconds of response time, by the time they understand that there's something interesting back there, the light turned green and they went on. Transit will be increasingly important because millennials are interested in it, because baby boomers aren't going to be able to drive, because automotive patterns are changing. We will see a lot more car sharing and so forth, but I think we're going to have to think about buses. We're going to have to think about trains and various kinds of contemporary transit. Our attitude to the streetcar in Cincinnati is a mistake. Even if it is just a downtown circulator, it's a down payment on 21st century transit. It's perceived as a good thing. We had 80,000 visitors in our city this weekend. It's perceived as a good thing by them. And to take the attitude that we're just going to let it fail because we don't like it makes us look dopey as a city. I don't care if you like it or not. We got it now. Make it work. Money. 3CDC. People say to us all the time, I want to do what 3CDC did. You can only do what 3CDC did if you have what 3CDC has, which is a ton of money and a ton of corporate support. But money plays into a lot of things. Terry talked about incentives. We got to have incentives if we're going to build these places. We've got to think about how we attract the retailers we want. Back to my point that most of the tenants we attract are non-credit tenants. That is a challenge for a developer. They got to figure out how to deal with that. Rent. What can they pay? We have clients sometimes who will come to us and say, I got $19 space. No, you have $12 space. No, it's $19. My pro forma says I gotta get $19. Well, that's great, but don't you love those conversations, Terry? Because the tenants don't say that you're entitled to $19. And I always use $12 when I say what I'm about to say, because I had a client years ago who said to me, I've got $15 space. I said, you got $19 space, $9 space. He said, no, my pro forma says I have to get $15. I said, oh great, let's say you have $12 space, and we keep it empty 30 days. Now you've got $11 space. Then we keep it open another 30 days. Now you got $10 space. We kept it open 2 years, you're negative 24 bucks. You'd have been better to go out at $9, because after 2 years you'd have $18 in the bank instead of $24 lost on your balance sheet. But it's very hard to make landlords understand that sometimes. sometimes. The most important one here is authenticity. And authenticity combines a lot of things. It combines uniqueness. It combines specialness. The Macy's store downtown failed because it deserved to. Terry's right. Macy's did keep it open longer than usual as a favor to the city of Cincinnati. And they had a CFO for many years who was a passionate Cincinnatian, but it was a bad store. I mean, as I always say, if I can walk through an entire store, top to bottom, including lingerie and shoes, and come out empty-handed, there's a problem. There is a problem. And I think Macy's overall, despite what they're doing, despite the backstage and the things that they're moving forward on, I think Macy's is, and I shop from all over the country. I was in Hawaii 2 years ago. I went to Macy's. Every place I go to Macy's because it's my hometown store. They're running bad stores. I was in Target in Oakley Station about 30 days ago. I hadn't been there in a while. And I thought to myself, damn, they've made this store really better. How can Target, which was Dayton Hudson before, be so much smarter about retail than Macy's? Macy's is running boring stores, and people won't go to boring stores anymore. I don't want to go in a store where I have to pick. I will do this, as Scotty knows, I will do this for him and TJ Maxx. But I will not go into a store where I have to pick through, pardon me, a pile of crap to find something. And then, when I find it, I can't get anybody to read me out. Because they got one cash wrap open on an entire 50,000 square foot floor, or two. I mean, there used to be a girl downtown at Macy's, and I would go in and I would say, "No, would this look good on me?" And she'd say, "No, ma'am, but let me go get you one." And I would walk out with 2 or 3 things because she would say, "No, this is what you want." That doesn't happen anymore at Macy's. It doesn't happen at TJ Maxx either, but I go into TJ Maxx in a different mood. It's like I'll find a treasure in here. There's something. And I've made the time, and I've made the mental space to go on the hunt. And the dollar stores, I was going to a grocery store the other day, which was Fresh Time, which is kind of a premium grocer, and it's right next to a Dollar Tree, and I needed something, and I thought, well, I bet you I can go into Dollar Tree and see if they have that. So I went in for that $1 thing and spent 22 bucks. And what a good location next to a Fresh Time, because I can afford to I can afford to shop at Fresh Time, and there's Dollar Tree right next door, saying, "Come on in, we got that one. You can buy something here," and 22 bucks. Over the Rhine, independent merchants, authenticity. That's what millennials want. They want high touch. They want places, things that are not commodities. Everything at Macy's is a commodity. They want things that their friends have validated. And Terry talked about they're shopping less and experiencing more, and that is true. But in the shopping they're doing, there is a flight to quality. Warby Parker glasses are not cheap. They are well priced, but they are certainly not the cheapest glasses you can get. But it's a cool experience. They have a good array of product. And you say you got your glasses at Warby Parker, and your friends go, "Wow, they look great." You go in there, I went in with my daughter in Washington, you go in there, they have a photo booth. I don't know if they're going to have one here, but they have those 4 snaps in a row. You can put the glasses on, go into the photo booth, take a picture. So that's an experience. That's something special. That's something that makes shopping interesting. And I found it really interesting that Terry talked about bonobos wanting to pick up customers who were downing over the Rhine for dinner because in the early days, our retailers failed, largely because people didn't want to take bags, and also because they didn't pay attention to when the traffic was there. They were open from 10 to 6. You want to be open from 10 to 6, you're going to miss the couple that is down there getting dinner. You're going to have to be open noon to 9, 11 to 9. Micah, which is still there after more than 10 years, they are open when the customers are there. And when you go into Micah, you see things that you don't see any place else. And interesting, to the point of Macy's, years ago we had another shop called Metro Nation, and Jim Zimmerman was at that point the head of Macy's. And he went into Metro Nation with me, and he looked around and he said, I don't know how to do this. And I said, I'm sorry, you're the great merchant prince. He said, yeah, I know how to order 1 million pieces in 9 sizes and 3 colors. How to pick the exact 5 right vases? I got no idea how to do that. Well, I need to learn. Community. Chuck talked about pushback from the communities on when the bats nest and what is important and regulations going up. Get used to it. Communities are feeling more and more empowered, and I think that's important because back to the subtitle on this presentation, no place can be every place, that's what retail was about for years. And I had the great pleasure, after I did Over the Rhine, I thought, you know, I've taught myself everything I know about this, my mother and father both being gone, I need to go someplace where there are guys who know more than I do, and I need to learn from them. And I had the great good fortune of working at the Brandt Retail Group before Steve Brandt retired. And Steve was a retail real estate genius, and he had a team of really smart people with him, including Scotty and many of the folks who are now at Onsite. And I really learned from those guys. And Steve was incredibly generous with his time. And one of the things I learned, and again, Terry talked on this, about this, is standardization is what makes that business work. Terry talked about boxes not being the size that his clients need. My clients go into the box and figure out the size later. And increasingly, there is a group of people who are willing to do that because in communities, in a lot of these communities, they've got existing boxes. Over the Rhine, the reason there aren't a lot of national retailers down in Over the Rhine is first 3CDC said no, but second, we don't have the footprints for it. So communities are going to be increasingly empowered, and that's not a bad thing because the era of homogenization is over. Standard is easier, standard is cheaper, standard is predictable, is easy, cheap, and predictable, what we want. The same, which is the old days, not the same. And then the other is probably e-commerce. And one of the things that interests me about e-commerce is how everybody didn't know what Terry's number was, 9.3%. I said 10, which is a number that is also out there, but nobody's doing the research and saying it's more than 10. Terry said, what by 2020, Terry? 12. So 2.7% growth by 2020, which means 88% of retail will be bricks and mortar. It may be different, but it will be bricks and mortar. And Amazon is Sears. There was a time when you could buy every single thing you needed, a house and everything in it, from Sears. Everything. A toothbrush, a blanket, a couch, and the actual house itself. Cincinnati has, especially in Pleasant Ridge, a whole collection of Sears Craftsman homes. They came in on rail cars. Every part was numbered. They were assembled on site. And then you bought all the furniture, all the clothing, all the appliances, all the pots and pans. So Amazon is doing that now. The point being, the first shopping center was invented by the Romans. We really aren't having as much radical change as we think we are because everything old is new again. What we're building in Blue Ash is essentially the 21st century version of what we built in Over the Rhine. We're making changes to it, we're adapting it, but Over the Rhine was built so that people could work, live, play, all in the same community. We're going back to that. We're going away from separation of uses. 170 million Americans, which is the baby boomers, and empty nesters about to converge in the same space, wants versus needs, commodity increasingly will come from online. That's the needs. My daughter buys cat litter from Amazon because what the UPS guy should have to carry that up her front stairs. Honestly, when you think about it, it makes sense. Those are needs. The wants, we're always going to want to pick our wants, at least largely personally. And we'll learn to do some of that online, but 88% of retail in the next 5 years will still be place-based. And experience and quality of life, that's what's changed. People have less time, they want to spend it better, and they want it to enrich their lives. And I was sick last week, and John made this, so I'm not sure where if my next slide is. Oh yeah, okay, thank you. And I love this because it talks about the value frame here. You can buy coffee beans for a penny to 2 pennies a cup. You can buy it from Dunkin' Donuts, or you can buy it in a bag for 5 to 25 cents a cup. You can buy it at Dunkin' Donuts for 75 cents to $1.50 a cup. And now you can buy it at Starbucks for $2 to $5 a cup. I used to have a young woman who worked for me, and I knew what she made because she worked for me, and it always astonished me that every single morning on her way to work, she would stop for a cup of Starbucks. And what I thought to myself is, but it mattered to her. It was about who she was. It was about what she wanted in her life. She prioritized having a cup of Starbucks over having $25 to buy another pair of shoes. And for a long time, it was the cup that was as important as what was in it. Because the cup said, I got this coffee from someplace cool. Now that's shifted. Starbucks is being wounded by the rise of competitors, and especially by the rise of independent coffee houses. Coffee Emporium is a client of ours, and we help them manage growth, but we have 4 or 5 other local coffee companies that we can work with. Is it the next slide, John? Is my second last slide? And Harry reminded me that I probably need to change the end of my presentation because I've ended it the same way for a long time. No, okay, envision the future. The car is no longer king. No place will be every place. No place can be every place. Mixed-use developments are growing in appeal and offer opportunity. Not to say that there aren't going to be a percentage of millennials moving out to single-family detached suburban homes, but even those will probably have smaller yards, they will have smaller footprints, they will be closer to amenities. Where we live needs to make us happy. Neatness doesn't necessarily count, and by that I mean over the Rhine and other urban neighborhoods. If you walk down the streets of Over the Rhine and compare them with Brookwood, for example, Over the Rhine's a ton more gritty, but people like it, and the amenities are down there. Life will be place-based and urban, yet to my point that let's not assume that urban, when we talk about millennial urban preferences, universal across the spectrum of millennials. And this is my most important principle, and I think it's extremely relevant, and I think everything that the preceding speakers said addressed this, which is we are moving. And if you stop moving, you stop. You don't. So, Catherine, I should probably...
Thanks so much, Kathleen. If you need to head out, go right ahead, but we'll take a few questions for folks that might have some burning questions that they'd like to ask. Anyone? Yes?
Kathleen, you mentioned phased senior housing in Southern Park. What do you mean by that? Is that independent living to AL to skilled nursing, or is it just?
No, it's that, exactly that. So that College Hill has a lot of senior living, and they have a senior residence. The no-go seniors, the slow-go seniors, and the no-go seniors.